Yes, welcome to week 3. And this is Dr. Noel Ridsdale again. And we're going to go over this time. Let's take a look at we're going to take a look at some leadership styles, and then we're going to look at this aspect of ethics and social responsibility. So as we're going down here and taking a look at this aspect here of situational leadership. Okay. And situational leadership is just exactly what it sounds like. It's leadership based on the situation. Okay. The contingency approach typically, and again, this is one of those I've used quite a bit, where you're looking at the aspect of the contingency approach is when leaders make their behavior, it's contingent on situational forces, which includes things like group dynamics. But in essence, though, the contingency approach is always looking at another way of doing things when you might have something wrong. Okay. So in the situational aspect of this, so when you take a look at this, it's more, I looked at this always as a contingency, is where I practice the contingency approach, because basically things always go wrong. In management, you're always looking for what's next. So in leadership, you're always looking to take a look at the contingency. What happens if this happens? What happens to the assembly line if this goes down? Can we still produce? Can we move? What's our plan of action? Okay, that's the contingency approach. So when you look at that, and you're looking at also from expanding the aspect of a contingency approach, you're looking at both internal and external. Okay, so internal would be that machinery breaking down, okay, and how you would react to that. Do we bring in another line? Do we have somebody on call to repair it? And what happens if it takes too long? Those are all contingencies. Okay, those are internal though. External contingencies would be things like, obviously, we've all been used to these days, is the shipping aspect of this, the supply chain. Okay. So what happens if you don't have supplies? What happens if you can't make something? Do you sub another part? Do you look for other alternatives? What also happens if you can't get your goods out? Okay, so all of these all plan here to really need to look at how you actually plan for all of these types of things the best you can under the contingency approach. Okay, you've always got to be flexible. Okay, especially when those things don't what worked in the past doesn't work now. So when you look at leadership effectiveness under situation leadership, is that accepting the fact that organizational effectiveness is affected by situational factors that are not under your control. Okay, situations happen. You have to figure out how you react to those situations is key to your employees and yourself. Also, the situations influence the consequences of your behaviors. So in other words, if you make a decision and it's not the best one, you just got to accept that and move on and be flexible. These are all things that relate to how you are placed in the situation. So we take a look at going forward here. We take a look at Fiedler, okay? And Fiedler he was pivotal on this aspect of contingency leadership, okay? And he's the first one that kind of came up with this theory of contingency leadership. So one of those things he said was the least preferred coworker scale measures the degree to which a leader describes favorably or unfavorably an employee with whom the leader could work with least well. So in other words, there's going to be somebody in your group who is going to give you problems, okay? And this kind of scale as he's looked at it, there will be people who are polar opposite from you, okay? And that's going to be where those people are, they're going to be what we would call either pleasant or unpleasant. Those are going to probably, people who give us problems are typically going to be unpleasant. So this is what we want to look at and understand in contingency leadership. Those are also going to be people who don't actually respond to you well in the aspect of having a contingency or you have to change something. Usually I look at those aspects of the ones that least work well are going to be your most rigid people. Those are going to be people who understand the process but don't want to change anything. They're very hesitant to change anything. Okay, it becomes very difficult for them to accept that change. Those are all aspects of what happens in the least preferred coworker scale. Now, relationship motivated employees usually describe their LPC in favorable terms. Typically, if you're in a charismatic leader or a servant leader, you're going to take a look at those as your least preferred coworker, your LPC, as being somebody who's less adaptable, but still can actually you can figure out a way to make them work. Whereas task motivated leaders tends to go, I just can't work with them. Okay, so they're all going to be kind of that type of situation. And then the relationship-oriented leaders should be able to work well with a variety of personalities. So you really want to concern yourself with working with figuring out what works well. How can you get those workers in a relationship way to work with you? Especially when you have to express a contingency. Okay, everybody works well typically as if the flow's going well. But when things start to go wrong, that's where the cracks show up in the armor. Okay, those imperfections. So we want to make sure that we're kind of handling those. So we look at the leadership situation. We look at these three aspects, and mainly these two aspects anyway. Three aspects of control, and these are high, moderate, and low. Okay, so if you have a high degree of control in the leadership situation, it's probably not going to work out, may not work out quite as well, or it might work out depending on the situation. If it's an emergency situation, you have a high degree of control, people will react very quickly. If you have a low degree of control in those situations, I still challenge that you can get the same amount of control in an emergency situation, but it's just how you manage that relationship. But going back to the relationship aspect. The dimensions of aspects of situational leadership are on and it goes back to the relationship, the task at hand. Okay, what is the task structure that you're looking at, and what's the position power? So in an emergency situation, you can actually your position power changes. Okay, to those people who are in control, no matter which aspect of it is, decisions have to be made. They have to function very quickly, and that's what you're really looking to do. That okay is to continue to move that control. The more control you have, the better it is for you. However, it does not necessarily, it won't work for you in the long run in any type of situation. Okay, so now you've got this aspect of people in a task form, okay, or in a table form. This is what Fiedler was looking at, okay? Task-motivated leaders perform best when they have the most control. So in the situation, they will be able to control that situation very, very good. As long as the task is well structured, the leadership position is high power, okay, and the leader-member relations are good. So they can actually have a great deal of situational control. Things like production line workers definitely perform best when they have the most control, okay? Relationship-motivated leaders perform best when they have moderate amount of control, okay? So relationship means that you both favorable and unfavorable factors can be present, okay? But realistically, they cannot, and when you're looking at relationship motivated leaders, they're ones who based on how well they work with individual employees. So you really want to kind of manage that, and that's how they manage. So they can react to situation by using the relationships with the individuals, okay? And they always work in the middle aspect of this, okay? Now this is where task-motivated leaders, when they have low control, which means they don't want a lot of control. But when they have a lot of control, then typically you have a lot of things that could happen when you have low control with a task-motivated leader. And that is the member relations aren't good, or the task is poorly structured, the leadership position is low, okay, or they don't view that person with a lot of position power. So that's where you really have at this end of the bottom of the bar here. This is where it's really tough in situational leadership, because if a task motivated leader has low control, he's got nothing to fall back on is basically the way it works. Okay. Now this is another one which is called the path goal leadership theory. Okay. So typically what you've got here are the characteristics of the group, the demands of the task. Okay. And what you do is interject the leadership style. Okay. So based on contingency factors, you would adapt your leadership style to meet the demands of the task or the characteristics of the group members to keep up productivity and morale. Okay, so this is a visual aspect of understanding how that aspect works, how leadership style is affected by these other two things, the demands of the task and the characteristics of the group. These factors are aspects of the group members or the aspects of the task. Path goal, the path goal theory to match leadership styles. Okay, so when you take a look at this, depending on the path that you need to get to your outcome and what those other inputs are, you select your style based on that, whether that's directive, supportive, participative, or achievement. Okay, so you're choosing one of those leadership styles to support the path that you need to take based on those other two aspects when we look at characteristics of the group members and the demands of the task. So you're going to choose one of those path styles. Okay. And then there's some steps in between that can help you influence this. You can act a group members' needs over which the leadership has control over. Maybe it's a situation where you need to work some more overtime, okay, and you have the opportunity to pay them more. Okay, that's something you have control over. Okay, or you're paying them a bonus. Okay, you can activate their needs and wants over that. You can also increase personal payoffs to the team for attaining the work goals, the attaboys, or maybe it's a day off, or maybe at the end you throw a big meal of something, which you can definitely work on those goals aspects. Making the path to payoffs easier by providing coaching and direction. Okay, those are things that you can do. Again, we're leaning into that relationship type of mentality. Clarify the effort of good performance and how performance leads to reward. Okay, again, that's kind of that relationship area. Reduce frustration barriers to reaching those goals. So typically that relationship, again, will help reduce those barriers. Increase opportunities for personal satisfaction, and don't irritate people by giving them instructions that they can already do well. In other words, don't repeat what they already know. Because that weakens that relationship between them and the situation. Crisis leadership, which is definitely an aspect of, and we've kind of alluded to this a couple of times I have in my discussion. Okay, and you need to balance this aspect of it, or task versus relational. Okay, so what you're doing is here under the task emphasis, you're looking at being decisive, definitely taking ownership, looking through the big picture, trying to get all hands to work on the same problem, dividing major problems into smaller chunks, okay, avoiding the circle the wagons. Denial is definitely a bad idea. So you're really working against that. Delegate authorities, okay, reestablish the work routine when you possibly can. Prevent crisis planning, prevent the crisis with planning. So, typically, most places I've worked in have had an emergency action plan or a crisis plan, where anticipate what you would do when the crisis hits. And in our cases, that's a lot of, it's about getting people out, doing all those types of things, and then being a transformational leader. At the bottom there, which again helps people through the issue at hand. Relational, and then on the other side, you're working on those charismatic styles. Okay, communicating widely. Okay, displaying optimism, building, working on those relationships. Display sadness and compassion. Staying calm. Big one there, staying calm, providing stable performance, giving recognition for accomplishments. Okay, all of these things work with you to help with through crisis management with your employees. Okay, so crisis leadership, typically it's those situations where things develop into it's a got to do something. We've got to move and do something else. Those are all issues that come into play. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. Okay, sometimes it's got to happen. Okay, in the case of lightning near a stadium, then things have to happen quickly. And employees need to know how to act, and you as the leader need to know how to manage that. It also could be a tornado wipes out part of the plant. Okay, you could have also a death of a key employee. Okay, which creates a crisis. And then you can see how each one of those will vary between the task and the relational emphasis, depending on what the crisis is. This is one where we always practice. This is where it bridges kind of into management. Okay, on evidence-based leadership or management, you've got to take a look at all the sources of evidence. What makes the organizational decisions? 4 sources of evidence should be considered. These are 4 sources that you should consider when making a decision. Okay, but in essence, you're really looking at all the factors before you make a decision. And what is the evidence? You data gather. Okay, you find some empirical. You go outside and look at what other people have done. That's where you're talking about empirical studies. And looking at judgments and experience of experienced leaders, value concerns of stakeholders. And then taking the study of leadership seriously. Think about all of these things as you're looking at it, as you're looking at leadership, and not just taking everything for granted. Okay, so now we're going to spend just a couple minutes on ethics, and ethical and moral leadership, because you guys may have already had BA 310 ethics, but if not, you're going to, and that changes a whole lot of things. So if you want to take a look at ethical leadership, okay, ethics is the study of moral obligations or separating right from wrong. Morals are your individual's determination of what is right or wrong, and moral leadership takes takes a stance on an issue and then convinces other people to do the same. Ethics is typically ethics should be at the center of all leadership decisions. Okay, your morals and the company's morals might play into the individual's determination of what's right or wrong, but realistically, in the end, ethical leadership should be actually doing the right thing. It's always doing the right thing as perceived by a reasonable or a consensus number of people. So it's basically, I equate this as basically this, is that ethical leadership is doing the right thing when making the decision that most people would do as the right decision. We do have 5 ethical behaviors. Typically, is being honest and trustworthy. We've heard that before. Paying attention to all stakeholders, in other words, really listening to the community, building a community within those individuals, respecting every individual and what they have to say, and then practicing healthy leadership, which typically you should be doing anyway. And then take initiatives for social CSR, corporate social responsibility. So achieving a social responsibility is taking a stand on social issues. Okay. As you can see around these issues, you can see what we need to do to really engage in this from a company perspective. Now, some companies will practice this more than others. Okay. And understanding that, we are in a changed environment today. Social responsibility is very important to individuals and how the corporation is viewed. How much do they engage in philanthropic operations? How do they engage in social entrepreneurship? Do they work within suppliers to work at that? Do they have a code of ethics? Those are the basics of what people have. On the other side, typically, providing ethics training and social responsibility, accepting whistleblowers. Okay, most companies do at least some portion of this. They may not do it all, but they do actually do a decent number of these. Philanthropic actions, the bigger companies do, smaller companies may not, or they might be a very local aspect of that. Building a sustainable environment. Again, that's a bigger one now, and and the government keeps pushing more and more that way because companies resist that aspect because it does definitely impact their bottom line. So when you take a look at that, and a good CSR policy, I'll start over there, is profit, people, and planet. The problem with that is that realistically, profits have a tendency sometimes to take over people on the planet. So you got to kind of take a look at where those are at. So we really need to kind of really gauge what that aspect is, and how that is. On the other aspect of this is you've got ethics, and really, you really want to run an ethical organization, okay? And these are some things where at the very least companies should do, and this is kind of the bare minimum, okay? Which is definitely having a code of conduct, okay? Developing a formal mechanism for dealing with those issues that arise, those ethical issues, okay? Figuring out a system that works for them. And then the last one is accepting whistleblowers, okay? Because you've got to accept whistleblowers, because those help your organization get better. Okay, like I said, this is just a quick overview of that because you're going to get a much greater sense of that when we get into when you get into the ethics class. All right, that's the end of week 3, and I'll be back with you for week